in a discussion, start with a good question. Learning to listen. Don't do all the talking. Learn not to interrupt. This is something I actually didn't mention before, but learning not to interrupt. On the health side, they did studies with doctors and patients, and they found out that doctors would wait 10 seconds before they interrupt their patients. Okay? And I think this is true in general conversation. So learn not to interrupt the other person you're talking to.
Өнөөдрийн подкастыг үргэлжлүүлэн үзэхээс өмнө би таныг манай багийн гишүүн болохыг урьж байна. Юу хийх вэ гэхээр манай YouTube сувгт subscribe дараарай. Ингэснээр та бидний бэлтгэж байгаа мэдээллүүдийг авахын хажуугаар таны амьдралын хэм маягт шаардлагатай өөрчлөлтүүдийг бид нар өгөх тэр хэмжээний мэдээллийг өгөх болно. Тэгээд комент бичгээ бити мартаарай. Учир нь манай багийнхан бид бүгдийг нь уншиж үзээд санаа сэтгэлээ чинь авдаг гэсэн үг. Тэгэхээр өөрт авсан мэдээлэлээ өөртөө үлдэхгүйгээр бусдтайгаа бас share хийгээрэй. За ингээ үргэлжлүүлээд ярилцлага үзье. A very good day, everyone. We brought you a very new episode today with someone who came to Mongolia, and he's doing great job. Last 50 years, he's doing the same project, same thing, driven by his passion, which is health in general. He wanted to make people healthier and happier by communicating with them, but not just communication. He communicates patients with the healthcare professionals and healthcare professionals with healthcare professionals. In all this communication environment, he brings his knowledge to make those goals to be achievable. So, Mr. Kenneth Yaangsteinтэй. Mm-hmm. Do I pronounce it correct?
That's fine. If I were home in Switzerland, that's exactly how they would pronounce it. So that's fine.
So how do you pronounce your name?
Well, until I moved to Switzerland, it was mostly Yaangstein.
Yaangstein?
But then in Switzerland, it became Yaangstein, so it's fine.
All right. So, welcome to our episode. So, my first question. Mm-hmm. How are you?
I have a bit of a cold, so excuse any funny sounds out of my voice. I'm very happy. A few days ago, I couldn't speak at all, so I was very happy that right now everything is fine.
Because of the throat.
Because of the throat, the cold, but it's...
So people say there's a new version of COVID out there, and then people getting sick.
Your common cold.
It's common cold.
This is the common cold.
All right. So be safe. There's no new version of COVID.
Okay.
Okay. So welcome to Mongolia and welcome to our podcast. And we would like to know, what was your career inspiration? Why you started working in this industry?
Okay. So my training was in medical school, neuroscience, studying the brain. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a psychologist, so my first degree was in psychology, and then I became interested in the brain and studied neuroscience. And then in 1975, organ transplantation had a rapid rise. It was all of a sudden booming because of many changes, both in terms of financing from the government and also new medications were were introduced at that time. And so I was asked by the first organ transplant bank in America, which was in New York City, mm-hmm. who was responsible for collecting organs for transplantation and distribution, if I would come advise them on several issues, but one of them was, why was it so hard to convince families to donate the organs of loved ones who have died? Mm-hmm. So I began to sit with these people and listen to how doctors were talking to these families. And for me, it was very obvious very quickly mm-hmm. that they were doing a terrible job of communication. The way in which they explained every aspect was just wrong mm-hmm. and not understandable and not compassionate and had none of the qualities that would result in a positive outcome.
Okay.
And so through this work, I also got to meet many patients, organ transplant patients, and they would tell me their stories. And they would ask me questions, and I said, but isn't your doctor telling you these things? And they said, no, the doctors don't tell us anything. And that's when I knew 50 years ago that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Wow.
So I continued working in the transplant field for a few years. And then the more I became known, people from all over kept asking me, well, can you do this for us and that for us? And I realized I should leave the New York Blood Center, the organ transplant program, and set up my own company. So in 1978, I established Biocom, Biomedical Communications, in New York City, and just began to work in the area of improving communication between the drug companies and doctors, between doctors and their patients, doctors to doctors. And so I started doing this work, and it was so new at the time that I got clients from all over the world. Even the government of China in the 1980s asked me to come and work with them at the end of the Cultural Revolution. And so, so that's what I've been doing ever since. And then 32 years ago, I left New York and I moved to Switzerland, and I've been living there ever since as my base of operations. And 12 years ago, I met someone who worked for an organization called Orbis International, and their focus is on eye care, delivering eye care throughout the world, but not just doing many operations like so many other NGOs do. They said, and I love this, we don't come to show off, we come to show how. So there was enormous focus on training, on education, building sustainable programs, training doctors in new techniques, making sure they had the right equipment. And they have done this really all over Asia, all over Africa and Latin America. And so this really has been my focus for the past 12 years now. And I've worked with them all over the world. I also wrote children's books that are put into schools with probably 500,000 or more copies in 27 different languages.
Wow. What's the name of the book?
Well, the one in Mongolia, and each time we move to another country, we completely redo the book.
Okay.
So all the illustrations, the details of the stories, and the one here is called Tuya and the Talking Grass. And it's the story of a young girl who doesn't play with the other children. They don't want to play with her. At school, they think she's stupid. And so she sits all day long in the field and listens to the talking grass, which are really the crickets and the grasshoppers and the things that live in the grass.
Like imaginary friends.
Imaginary friends, exactly. And one day her mother discovers this, and she asks her, why are you sitting here? And she says, well, nobody wants to play with me, but aren't you lonely? No, I'm not lonely. I have my friends. Just listen. And the mother listens, but the mother then reaches over and spreads the grass. It can see all of these crickets in the grass. And then she realizes something is wrong. So the next day, the father and the mother all get on their motorcycle and they go to the local health center and they do a vision test. And not surprisingly, it turns out that she needs eyeglasses. She has myopia, nearsightedness. And so they give her the new glasses. And of course, I don't want to wear glasses. My friends will make fun of me and things like that. But she does, and it just transforms her life. And at the end of the story, she goes back to the tree and she to the grass, and she parts the grass and she can now see what's there. And she says, thank you so much for keeping me company, for talking to me for such a long time.
Wow.
And I promise that next year when we come back to this area, I will see you again. And maybe by then I will have learned your language. It's very sweet. So it's a very touching story.
Sir, you just spoiled all the book, but thank you. And then let me tell you, my audience, that even though you spoiled, you should buy this book and then give it to your kids or
well, it's not available for
sisters.
sale. It's distributed through vision centers and schools. It's distributed free of charge.
All right.
To schools throughout Mongolia.
That's amazing. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I don't want to move on from this, the beginning of your career. I would like to know, what was the exact examples? I would like to hear the examples that those doctors communicating with these individuals, trying to convince them to be a donor. So what was like the wrongdoing
exactly.
of them?
And nothing's really changed.
Okay.
What I learned then is still
That's what
true
I
today.
thought so. And then I want to hear it, and then I want to let people know.
And the biggest problem is that they talked too much and they listened too little. And I think this is the biggest failure that people make in communication, is they just talk and talk. They want to show how smart they are. they don't listen to other people. And people think that communication equals talking. So if you say, oh, he or she is a very good communicator, they usually are saying to you, they're very good talkers. But being a good talker doesn't make you a good communicator. And communicator isn't about talking. It's really about 5 different skills. And the first is learning to ask good questions. Questions that allow you to understand, who is this person I'm talking to? What do they need from me? What do I need to give them? And then there's the listening part. So when they tell you, answer your question, that you actually listen to them. Now, I'll say a quick thing about listening.
Yeah.
There are 2 kinds of people in the world.
Okay.
There are those who listen, and there are those who wait to talk. And I think most people, when I talk about this, understand the difference between the two. And I'm sure we all know people like that. And we've all probably been guilty of that same failure, of not listening to our husbands, our wives, our friends, but just waiting for them to stop talking.
And then
I can tell them everything about me,
Wow.
And this is really the problem. So after listening, then you have to sort of confirm that I really understand what your problem is and what do you want. And then the 4th skill is thinking about it. Okay, what's going on here? Yeah. And then finally, after you've done these other things, then you earn the right to start talking. So the biggest problem that always existed was all these doctors, they sit down and they talk, and then they would say, do you have any questions? And they would shake their head, no. This was the big failure. And in communication, especially in health communication, there are 2 things, and this might be hard to translate, that you have to think about. There is a disease, and then there's an illness. And the disease is the pathology. It's what the doctor sees. You have this problem. You have a problem with your heart or a cataract or whatever the problem is. The patient doesn't care about the physiology, about the anatomy. It's how it impacts their life. Oh my God, I don't feel well, and if I get sick, I won't be able to work, and if I can't work, who's going to look after my family, and all of these other things. And doctors have to learn. They've always been trained to treat only the disease and not to treat the illness. Not to understand, how does the disease which I have diagnosed affect the life of this patient and their families? And if I'm really going to help them, then I need to address that aspect, not just take out the tumor or do the surgery or whatever it is. How am I going to make their lives better? And this has really been the failure all along. So when we do our work of teaching, we try and give them the kinds of skills, the things that they can do to understand, how does this disease impact my patient? What do I need to achieve the goal of really helping them? And so I think this is something that hasn't changed over the 50 years, and it's relatively new in the field of healthcare. People thought, well, as long as I do a good diagnosis and I'm a good surgeon, whatever, that makes me a good doctor. And very often these people are, we call it healthcare. And we want to put the caring back in healthcare. And so there was a time when people would say, oh yeah, he has good bedside manner, was the expression. He was very friendly with his patients and nice, and they liked him. That shouldn't be the exception. That should be the rule. Respecting our patients and understanding their needs. In the old days, there was a big hierarchy between healthcare professionals and the patients. The doctor had all the knowledge, the training. In many societies, even in
like
Buddhism,
God,
they were like a god.
Yeah.
And very often they were, in fact, priests. In the early days, healthcare was delivered by the Buddhist monks.
Yes.
There weren't lay doctors in those years. And
we say it maram, which is like priests.
Yeah. So the patient had very little power. The doctor had all the power. And any communication flowed down.
Yes.
And over the past few years, we've seen this equalization between doctors and patients. Patients don't today, the public doesn't think of doctors as gods anymore. They see them as technicians, as service providers, and
which society are you talking about that
really
they
globally
equalized? Okay,
really globally, this has happened. And one of the big factors in very recent years has been the mobile phone.
Okay,
Because with the mobile phone, everybody has access to information, not just the doctor, but also I can find out about these diseases just by going on my phone and typing in a few keystrokes.
That's true.
And get information. And so this has had a tremendous effect. I think also the increase in the number of women entering the medical field has also changed the feeling. Women don't need to have this feeling that I am a god or a goddess, the way I think many men did in healthcare. And so in general, we've seen this equalizing between the two.
Hey, подкастын таалагдж байна уу? Үргэлжлүүлээд бүр илүү ихийг сонсохыг хүсэж байгаа бол биднийг дэмжээрэй. Бид Хандивын даастаа болсон байна. Тайлбар хэсэгт нь оруулсан байгаа. Эсвэл энийг хардаа. Баярлаа.
So woman comes into the industry. What happens?
It's not as well studied as I would have hoped. I've tried to get data on it, what the impact has been.
Yes.
But I think it's become more human.
Okay.
I think it's become more about the caring aspect. Women understand the concept very quickly that I have to treat the whole person. I can't just do that. They learn this just raising their own children and their interaction with other women. So I think there's been a fundamental change by bringing more women into the healthcare system.
So I think you must have this method to deliver this knowledge or skill to someone who's in need to have a communication skill, right?
Yeah, we run workshops, which are pretty much standardized worldwide.
Okay. How many hours do you have to spend on it?
Do I have to spend on it? Well, we just completed a program actually in India. This is a woman there who I've worked with for many years, and she's probably the best trained in this area in the East. So we brought 4 doctors from here, from Mongolia, and 5 from Vietnam. And it was a 7-day program.
Okay.
And I think that's just about right. Now, the important skills I can do in a day, because a lot of them are obvious to people. This idea of talk less, listen more. Look at the way in which you're working with your patients or your clients or anybody else. If you're doing all the talking, you have to change. Are you involved in a dialogue or are you involved in a monologue? And also this idea of monologues and dialogues is also interesting because of what we talked about, this idea of waiting to listen. You and I can have a dialogue, which means you talk and then I talk and you talk, then I still doesn't mean that I'm actually listening to you and I'm not just waiting for my opportunity to talk to you.
Right.
So the important thing is I say, teaching them simple skills about asking open questions, not just yes and no. And this is for many years, well, in recent years, doctors have become extremely dependent upon technology for making a diagnosis. But before that, the greatest diagnostic tool that any doctor had was talking to the patient.
Yeah.
So they somehow have lost that and depended upon EKGs and EEGs and MRIs and all of this technology. And then they look at the data at this, and then they say to the patient, okay, this is what's wrong with you, and this is what we're going to do, and that's it. And this is still very much the same in even the West right now. And so teaching them that to look beyond that, look beyond the data from all these machines and look at the patient is really the most important thing. And then teaching them skills like what's called teach back. In the old days, well, traditionally, still today, the doctor talks, and then at the end says, do you have any questions? And of course, the patient usually just shakes their head, no. And that's not any good. And then they leave their office and they have no idea. So we teach a very simple technique called teach back. At the end of your discussion with the patient, you get them to tell you, what did we talk about just now? Can you tell me what is the disease that, what we've diagnosed? What is our proposed treatment? What are the options? And then, let them tell you. You can then listen and say, well, that's pretty good, but correct things if necessary. And so this teach back, when I do courses all over the world, and I come back to these groups a year later, and I say, of all the things I taught you, what was the most powerful tool? It was the teach back. So this is important. But in terms of communication in general, this idea of just slow down, talk less, listen more, and really listen to the person you're talking to or talking with. The whole notion of talk in English, talking to means it's one direction.
Yes.
Talking with somebody implies that there is a dialogue, there's an exchange of information. And so I think all of us, what we need to do, and I even find myself with my own wife and colleagues and people very often falling into the, of just giving a monologue, giving a whole speech about things, and never just stepping back and say, talk to me. Even in social life, I thought about this in terms of dating, right? So you meet somebody for the first time, a boy and girl meet, in a restaurant or whatever, and so many people, especially men, it's like, well, tell me about yourself. And then they go on and on and on and on. And then give very little room to the lovely young lady to tell her story. Rather than say, well, I know who I am. I'd really be interested in hearing about you. Or saying something, asking a question. What makes you happy? What's the best thing you've done this year? And so this is a problem that we have in social life all the time. People are so important for them to talk and talk and talk rather than try to understand the other person and to listen to what they have to say. So that's my advice, my dating advice to the audience as well. But also, in job interviews as well. Potential employer would be much more impressed by somebody who asks them very good questions about the company or about the job and then puts their discussion about their own life and their own expertise into that context. So this whole idea of speaking less, listening more, asking good questions is really the key to all of this.
Yes. Every communication has its goal, right?
Yes.
So,
and the goal is one of the great definitions of goal of communication is that communication, whether it's by language or signs or symbols, whatever, it should be with the intention to affect change. And so you always have to ask yourself, when I'm speaking, what change do I want in the person in front of me or the audience in front of me? If there's no change affected, then all you're doing is moving data from A to B. And communication should not be about just moving information. It should be about affecting change. And that's true also with public education campaigns. So many of these things, a big poster, this is National Vision Week or National Diabetes Week. Okay. There's nothing in there that will affect change. There's no action that's required. So in communication, the goal should normally be, ask yourself, what change, what do I want to achieve as a change in the person in front of me? And that should really be the ultimate goal of all communication.
Wow. Such a valuable lesson just you given us. I mean, just now I remembered that I posted something on Twitter. So there was data about Asian companies not giving importance to the cybersecurity. So because they losing money and then they're getting attacked by hackers, right?
Yep.
So that was information about this, and then I posted. So what was the goal? I wanted people to protect themselves and give importance to this subject and do something.
Exactly.
But there was no call to action. The thing that was just that's it.
So you gave information rather than communicating.
Yeah.
Because there was nothing built into it. And I think for all people in your business, in advertising, in whatever that deals with the public, you always have to ask yourself, what do I want to achieve? What change do I want? That makes communication. It's the same between doctors and patients, between family members. It's just giving people information is moving data. It's not communication.
Okay, we can go on and on on this topic, and I would like to know first those who went to India to study this communication, how they doing? I mean,
well,
the Mongolians. What do we have a difference between other countries from cultural perspective?
I don't think there is very big cultural, because these are universal problems. These are universal values.
Amazing.
Yeah. And our goal is these first four, they were trained also to be trainers. So we didn't want to just train them. We wanted to teach them, how do you go back to your country and train other people? So what we're trying to build is a core of communication experts who will then be able to go out into the community, work with doctors throughout the country to increase their levels. So, for example, I went to one of the nearby EMAGs on my last visit that I was here, and I gave a lecture at, and one of the people in the audience was the director of a local hospital. And so tomorrow I'm going there to talk to his entire staff of the hospital and even surrounding hospitals about the same kinds of questions. So I think there's a real interest in improving the communication abilities of healthcare professionals. And but in the past, I've also worked with banks and insurance companies and things like that. When they heard about what I do, they said, "Well, can we also do this in our bank, or can we do it in our insurance company, or Salesforce?" And so I've been, over the years, also worked in many other industries to bring them the same ideas.
So same idea goes for every industry.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
That's right.
I've heard, but from someone, and you were the special ingredient for legalize this law to make donors to be able to give their parts to.
Well, not with that part. That was already done.
Yeah, about years ago, right?
Yeah, but when I was before me, that was done. The idea of the Universal Anatomical Gift Act. One of my contributions was, because it was called the universal, everybody in America thought that every state, there are 50 states in America, that they all had exactly the same laws. And we were sharing organs all the time. So we would share organs all across the United States. And so one day I got many of the state laws. I looked at them and I realized that they were very different at each other. And then every day we were doing things which were technically not quite legal.
Okay.
So I wrote the first law book on transplantation and the law, analyzing all these different things and looking for the goals, recommendations, how in each state they could make changes that would make our lives much better in terms of being able to exchange organs with each other. What I worked on doing was one of the things I was asked to do as a neuroscientist when I joined this transplant program was to work in the area of brain death. Now, I don't know if your audience all understand, but that's the idea that you can declare people dead based upon the absence of brain activity, even though with a machine you can keep their heart beating.
Yes.
And this was a very, very new concept. And so my first job was actually to solidify the criteria. How do you do this? What are the tests, things you have to think about? And of course, these are all people who have suffered massive injury to their brains, either by having a stroke or illness or gunshot wounds, which is very common, especially in New York, unfortunately, or motorcycle accidents before there was helmet laws. So my job was working on that, and then to get a law that recognized that brain death is a legal definition of death.
Okay.
Because doctors were afraid as well, if I declare this, can the family come and sue me that the patient wasn't really dead? No. So we worked on a law that says, no, brain death equals any other kind of death. It is a legal definition of it. Because remember, the patients are breathing, but only because there's a machine doing the breathing for them. So one of the key definitions of brain death is the inability to breathe on your own. So anyway, that's on the legal side where I was working.
Okay, in Asia, especially in Mongolia, there's a people who believes in different religions, and then to be a donor or make the loved ones to be a donor, it's very difficult to be convinced. And what was your techniques to convince those patients? And then, how would you convince a Mongol to be a donor, or a Mongol family to be a donor? So I would like to know your techniques, and then what's the important aspect? What is the biggest thing that we need to know to communicate with that kind of people?
Yeah. There are many religions throughout the world look at the sanctity of the body, so that when somebody dies, they shouldn't be opened up or things taken out because they should be buried whole or they can't go to heaven if they don't have all their organs and things like that. So this is something that's quite common. Mm-hmm. But I've always find it a bit hypocritical because if somebody needs help for themselves, they have no problem to say to a surgeon, okay, open me up and fix my heart or fix my eyes or whatever. I break my bones and, you have to do an incision to do that. But for some reason, they feel very bad about opening the body of someone who has died, a loved one, in order to help someone else. Mm-hmm. And the key to all this is that all major religions have as a very essential part this idea of our obligation to help others. And when you have this obligation to help others, it sometimes goes over all the other rules. For example, in Judaism, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, on the Friday. But if there's an accident, if somebody is in danger, well, you could do whatever necessary to help this person, right? So this helping other people supersedes other kinds of beliefs. And I think that we all have to learn in our lives that things like organ donation, yes, you have already died, if you're going to agree that in the future I'm going to be a donor, or your loved ones, if you've never had a discussion about this, that the obligation to help others, that the ability to save someone's life by giving them an organ, knowing that part of your loved one lives on. This wasn't just stopping here, that it actually lives on, that in their death, they were able to bring life to someone else. So I think when the messaging is communicated properly, but then it goes back to what I spoke about earlier. If you're the person asking, you don't start with just talking about donation. You ask the family what their views are. Mm-hmm. And you learn to identify what are their beliefs. And only after you've done that, then you can address their beliefs. If you never ask them, then you never know. And then you're not talking, you're not communicating. So one of the essential things is to understand what the ideas, the concerns of the other person are, get them out clear, and then to address them rather than to give an off-the-shelf speech about the value of organ donation or whatever it is. So this is something I think that is true for this topic of organ donation, but true for communication in general. Why are you upset? Rather than talking about something, I can see that you're upset. Why are you upset? Oh, I'm upset because they made me wait for 3 hours and at this clinic and before I came in there. You're absolutely right to be upset. I would also be, I'm sorry that we had so many patients today and one of our doctors is sick, but you're here now and we are here for you. But if you never asked that question, what would you know? Mm-hmm. So learning to look for conditions, it's also part of this whole thing about having empathy, right? Empathy has two components. One is the ability to see the emotional state of the other person, but also your ability to express that. So if I see that you're upset, but I never say to you, I can see you're upset, or whatever is going on, that's only half of empathy. So it isn't just my ability to read the emotional state of the other person, but to express that in ways that allows us to have a true dialogue.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you've studied psychology. Mm-hmm. What was the biggest thing that gave you psychological field to use in communication field?
Well, this may surprise you, but my training as a psychologist was not with humans, but I was a primatologist. I studied primates. I studied chimps and gorillas and monkeys, and it all started at the end of my undergraduate studies. I was basically in neuroscience. And then I met this professor who had come to the university, and he had just come back from Ethiopia studying these very, very wonderful animals, the geladas. It's a type of monkey. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, that is really cool. What a nice way to spend your life. I mean, I was spending my life in a laboratory, putting electrodes into the brains of little animals, which I never really liked doing that. But and I thought, well, spending time in the forest studying these things as a psychologist, animal behavior, would be really cool. And so,
aren't we different?
Not very. No. The interactions between, and also communication is a key. Both communicating between individuals, groups of individuals, the entire group of animals that you're living in, your ability to communicate with animals even outside of your
Tribe.
All of these things are essential. The way in which mothers interact with their children and communicate, and this leadership, this dominance, which is very primitive but also very real, this idea of having a leader and I'm the one in control of my team. How this dynamic works largely through communication. Even at a very, very basic level, probably right down to bees and other colonizing animals, certainly amongst birds. And so the first 8 years of my studies after my undergraduate work were really as a primatologist. So I lived in Uganda for years. I lived in Liberia. I've studied primates all over the world. And then I thought, okay, I've done this. It was really cool, but maybe it's time to grow up. And that's when I went back to medical school.
You entertain yourself for 8 years, huh?
That's it. It was a lot of fun, and it was great work, and I learned a lot. And one of the things I learned from that is you go into a group of monkeys, you find them in the forest, and there may be 20, 30 of them living as a colony, as a tribe, is that as an outsider, to be able to look at them and to very quickly understand who's the boss, who's the next level in there, what are the relationships between each of the different members of this tribe, and how do they interact with each other. And that's a talent which also I think it's helped me over the years, going into different cultures and different places and being able to be an observer and to understand the dynamics of behavior between individuals, whether they're humans or they're primates or whatever. So that to me was a very important thing to learn. And of course the skills of being a researcher, of how you collect data and you analyze it, you think about, that also helped as I moved on in my career.
So that structure, that hierarchy, it's similar to our political system?
In many ways it is. And depending upon the culture, maybe the local environment, different skills are required. Sometimes it's the toughest guy. This has been true. The alpha male, and but the alpha male was determined by physical strength. In other cultures, it's the one who knows how to survive the best, who has the knowledge, the smart ones, not the biggest guys, who can intimidate the others. And so, just thinking about, time I've spent in Bhutan, where their whole history was all about, they would bring the leaders of the tribes together and they would physically fight, and the one who was living at the end became the ruler for the country. That's one way to, maybe it's better than elections when you look at the American election system.
That's a different communication.
But it's different communication. So, this whole idea of leadership at different times and in different environments requires different skills. And you can't sort of keep depending upon this tough guy approach to leadership in a time where that's less important than understanding the needs of your group and how you're going to help them meet it and how the group is going to survive. So I think that's something that's certainly applicable today.
With that said, applicable, I would like to have some tips from you that we can use in everyday life to communicate between each other. This video, this episode, what we do as a podcast, this is the one way of communicating with society, right?
Yep.
So we believe, this topic is important. That's why we broadcast this to the society. So we giving a one-way information to them.
Yes.
And now we have to hear from them, right? And
exactly.
Feedbacks and all stuff,
yep.
all those things. But we do have feedbacks. But I have this conclusion or opinion about my society, this nation, that we lack the communicating each other. We lack so much the methods that how we can communicate effectively. We are communicating, but the effectivity or effectiveness is lacking. So please give us some useful tips.
Yes, it's interesting. In the West, some of the best-selling books were called self-help books.
Oh, yeah?
And this is very egocentric self-help, right? They didn't give you tips necessarily on us help. We help.
We help.
You know, and I
Let's
think it's
help.
very different than self-help.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have to do is sort of remove this idea that it's about us, that we are the center of the universe, and to understand that our survival on a personal level and on a group level is our ability to work together. And the thing that allows that is this whole idea of communication. And the other thing is, you were talking about this one-way communication and what you hope to achieve. And the key here is going back to a very early definition of communication that I like. And that is, communication is the use of words or images or gestures, whatever you're going to do, with the intent to make a change. And so just talking without having an action point, without talking about that, isn't really communication. It's just delivering information. And so even in a program like this, the key is, what do you want to change in the behavior of the person that you're podcasting to? You know? And so if you can do that and make sure and keep asking yourself, is everything that I'm doing working in that direction? And so when you do that, then you actually begin to communicate properly. What is the change? And then after that is the whole idea of making, too often, we talked about this earlier, is that it's too much of a monologue. It's all one way. And communication only is effective when you can sort of put your ego on the side.
Yep.
Ask people, show them that you understand what it is that, this idea of empathy, of learning to identify in other people. What is their emotional state? What do they need? And then to communicate that in an effective way. So when there's an argument, rather than just respond, I understand, I can see that you're upset. Tell me why you're upset. So this is the idea of opening with a question. Let the person tell you why they're upset. Listen. Don't wait to talk, but listen to what they say. And then try and address, what is the change? I want them not to be upset. What is my goal? Maybe my goal is, I want them to be upset because I'm through with this relationship with my boss or my girlfriend. So if that's your goal, is to let it, that's fine too. But you should be clear about what is the change that you want to achieve. And then you can reply. And as you are going through this, to constantly make sure that you're understanding. If I understand correctly, you're upset because this has happened. Is that right? And it shows the person that you're listening. So really incorporating this idea of asking good questions, listen to what people say, confirm that you're talking about the same thing. Because it's very easy, especially in very tense situations, to start talking parallel to each other and not in the same direction. So only through this confirmation process can you show the person you're listening, make sure that you understand why whatever is happening, and to start achieving that. The other one is about if you have to give information to people, break it into manageable pieces.
Okay.
This is one of the most important things. And so in medicine, you could either give a fluid into the body and in a big push, or you can drip it slowly.
Yeah.
And communication should be the slow drip and not the big push. So in English, we have this expression of chunk and check.
Chunk and check.
Yeah, chunk and check. So a chunk is taking a small piece out of some big piece. That's a chunk, right? And then check. So if you have a big amount of information to give people, pull off a chunk, a piece of it, deliver it,
and check.
Then check to make sure that it's fine. And then you go on and you do this. And one of the big mistakes is that people try to give too much too fast, and then people just stop listening. Okay? So, and then, of course, when we talked about this idea of teach back at the end, I think works in a lot of situations. People, when I start presenting this thing, it's a structured look at communications, opening the conversation, gathering information, planning the next steps, and then closing. This is part of the medical way we do it. And I say to them, people think this is such an artificial construct, having these different stages. I say, well, just think about this. You come into the office in the morning, you meet up with one of your colleagues. Hey, hi, how you doing? That's an opening. Then gather information. What did you do last night? Yeah, I went to this really great film and I saw this film and yeah, wow. I mean, I would also like to see it. And the guy and the colleagues will give you more information. And then you can plan on things together. And then at the end you say goodbye. So even that kind of an encounter has an opening, you gather information, you plan, and then you close. So that kind of very simple structure applies to almost every situation where you're having communication. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things I think when you start to apply them into everyday life that you'll find is like, wow. You know, just think about the last fight that you had with a friend or with your spouse. You know, what was it all about? What was I doing all this talking? Or was the other person doing all the talking?
There were no chunk and check.
Yeah, there was no
chunk and chunk and chunk.
Yeah, it was chunk and chunk.
And Chucky Chang.
And that's it. You know, and not a lot of the checking and not a lot of this idea of asking yourself, what does she or he need from me? What do I need to achieve my own happiness as well? And where are we going to find common ground if that's your goal to do that? So I think these are really universal concepts in communication and ones that we have to learn both in interpersonal relationships, in group relationships, in international relationships. You know, very often when I watch, for example, the opening of the UN and each of the heads of state are giving their speeches, I ask myself the question also, what do they want to achieve? You know, what is the change that they want in the audience? And very often it's lacking. It's just they come out with blah, 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 and talk and talk and talk. And there is no real opportunity for change because they never, very often are not even clear. I mean, the other small tip is preparation, is knowing if you're going into a situation, right, is true whether it's a doctor or you're going to meet with a client or you're meeting with other people, is try to be prepared. The more you know about the history that led up to what you're going to be talking about, the better prepared you are to do that. And I've been to many lectures or presentations rather than lectures over the years, and I ask myself, God, did this person ever even ask the host, who are the people in the audience? What are they expecting from me? What is their language capabilities? You know, no, they just came and they gave their presentation about their company or whatever it is, and that was it. That was moving information. That wasn't communication. So preparation is extremely important.
For everything, right?
Everything. Yeah. Being prepared is really important. Yeah.
Hey, подкастын таалагдж байна уу? Үргэлжлүүлээд бүр илүү ихийг сонсохыг хүсэж байгаа бол биднийг дэмжээрэй. Бид Хандивын наастаа болсон байна. Тайлбар хэсэгт нь оруулсан байгаа. Эсвэл энийг хардаа. Баярлаа.
Can you give a recommendation on books that we can read about it?
I wish I could. I'm not really, I can't think of one offhand. The ones I tend to look at are very healthcare oriented. Yeah. And so I have a whole bookshelves full of books about communication in healthcare, how you communicate with patients, which are largely repetitious. I often ask, why did they have to publish this book? It's exactly the same as the other one on the shelf, because there are these skills. It's always the same skills. I have not really looked at outside of healthcare what's going on. So it's it's just a question of time. I only have limited resources.
So you've been in Asia, in Africa, America, Europe, right? So in Mongolia, also. So what is the biggest the takeaways from every continent that you, up until now, you live by?
Well, the thing that's impressed me most about Mongolia are the people. I mean, I've rarely worked with people who are so passionate about the work they have to do. The local team I work with, the Orbis team here, and they're smart, and they're very, very focused. And but just everybody I meet on the street, even if there's no real language connection, we always seem to figure a way out of doing these things. There's no sort of arrogance, which is very nice. Unlike, for example, the French, which no matter how well you think you speak French, it'll never be good enough for them, and so there's that kind of a thing. So it's, I mean, I've always been culturally drawn to Asia. I collect Asian art. I'm very interested in Buddhism and Buddhist art. And was recently taken to the big monastery and temple here in town, and the person with me was
So
like,
you
all those
believe
things?
you believe in Buddha?
No, I don't believe in Buddha, but I believe in Buddhism.
Okay.
And many of the concepts,
The philosophy.
the philosophy is important. Taking personal responsibility is at the core of his teaching. You can't blame God. I mean, there is no concept of God in the same way that other religions have.
True.
And I love that idea. You take responsibility for your own life and for your own future.
So you have this belief system from the beginning, or you've changed?
I think I only was able to give it a name as I got older. But I think it's something I got from my own parents, who are not religious people. But this idea of personal responsibility and making a difference in the world and these kinds of things, that how you live and how you die is really a function of how you've lived your life. Have you lived a life of service or just being selfish? And so
we have this saying that you came naked and you'll go naked.
Yes, and what you do in between, if you're only clothing yourself, that's probably not a great life. But if you learn to, after you've looked after yourself and your family, to make sure that all the people around you are also clothed, is, I think, what makes a good life. And so I've also, in terms of the aesthetic of Asian culture and Asian art, both historically and even contemporary, is something that has always fascinated me. So I have a very large collection of Korean artists. And in Japanese, and even met some very interesting Mongolian young people who are terrific talent here. And so that has been that. People always ask me, well, what's your favorite place? And it's very hard to say that. I mean, I love being in Africa and working stuff. But it's different. So at different points in my life, a place had an application. I mean, I'm happy that I lived most of the time. I still work a lot in Africa, but living in Africa when I was 19, 21, to 21, that was a great time to be there. Whether I'd want to be there now at my age, probably not. And it was even the same thing about, I grew up in Italy. I was born in New York, but as a small child, my family moved from New York to Italy, and that's where I was raised. It was also a wonderful place to live as a child. But to be there as an adult and trying to run a business is not as easy. Going as a tourist is wonderful, but trying to do business in some of these places. So each place has its relevance for a certain stage in your life. And I think that I've met so many professionals here who spent time in places like Cuba or Germany or Russia or China. This enriches their lives. And I really encourage people that at some point in your life, get out of your culture, experience what other cultures are like, and then hopefully come back.
And choose, right?
Right, and choose.
Choose the culture.
This is what you want. This is what makes you happy. This is where you see your future. And I would like to see as many people as possible come back to Mongolia, that Mongolia creates job opportunities so that these highly trained, and that's the truth in all over the world these days, is that through the automation and through now AI and so many different changes, whole industries that used to exist have disappeared. And yet we're educating our young people to such a standard that never before, but you have to give them opportunities to use this knowledge and all the skills we're giving them. So the biggest frustration is, how am I going to get a job where I am? And so this constant migration is being forced a lot by very well-educated young people, but no opportunities. So they go to other countries. And then when they do that, they have families, and then it's hard to leave and to come back. So I think very important part of the planning of the future of this country has to be, what are we going to do with the doctors and the architects and the engineers and the IT people that we're training here? Will we have jobs for them that will keep them in Mongolia?
I have this very random question, not related with the topic, but I want to know your beliefs on this matter. What happens after death? What will happen to you after that?
No, I believe it's basically you turn the switch off. I don't believe in an afterlife at all. And I've often found that extremely comforting. So one of the things that even when I was 19, living in the forest with the chimpanzees all by myself, I've never had a fear of death. because I believe, dying is not a pleasant thing, hopefully, or it can be.
For sure.
But if you're eaten by a lion, it's not very pleasant. But for me personally, I always found great comfort in the idea that it just stops.
Stop sensing.
Everything. That's it. You just turn off the lights and it's dark and that's it, and there's no afterlife after that. I always found it comforting and not scary. And so I've been able to do all the things I've done in my life. Maybe put myself in danger too often, but that's another thing. And I think that this is, for me, very important. Other people find enormous comfort in the idea that there is an afterlife that doesn't stop here. But I think also with this idea of the afterlife, if I'm going to achieve anything, I better do it now. I've got a limited time on earth to make a difference.
Everyone does.
Yeah, and that's what everyone does. And so, So anyway, my personal thing is that at death, it all stops. And that's it. It's just, you turn off the switch and that's it. And I personally find that comforting.
So you believe, not believe, today you and me sitting in here in center of the country,
Yep.
in Ulaanbaatar, talking about communication in general. And was it the future that you wanted, or this present moment is the thing that you wanted way before when you were young? You going through your plan, or you're discovering?
I'm more discovering. I don't think I had a plan when I headed off the first time to Africa to live with the chimps, and then afterwards. But there's been it's an evolution, But I think, as I mentioned before, from the very early days that I started my own company, I always made sure that part of the year was spent doing something to help other people outside of the commercial world. Mm-hmm. So I would make my money from my contracts with the pharmaceutical companies and governments around the world. But then I always found time to go off and to work in India or in China at the end of the Cultural Revolution, where they needed a lot of help. When, in the Himalayas, a lot of places, or in Africa, trying to advance healthcare in these countries. So in that sense, there's been a red thread, as we say in Germany and in Switzerland, that's run through my life. Since I'm an adult. But how I do that and the way I work on it, that's a constant evolution. Mm-hmm. And even at age 76, I hope I'm changing all the time. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, woof. I believe that I can evolve, and I'm changing all the time and learning new things, and that's what makes life very exciting.
Non-linear.
Yes, non-linear.
I feel very comfortable and feel happy. And I would say I feel warm. And just got like this feeling that I understood someone and I'm being understood by someone. So this is the feeling that I just got now. And I hope the people who watch and listen us get the same feeling that I got. But it's impossible for them to have this feeling, exactly the same feeling that I felt. But they can assume how Mando feeling right now, because one thing is lacking, because we're not hearing from them and they are not expressing themselves. So I would like to end this episode listening from you, the wrap up, and please give us a call to action information.
It'd be my pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about some of the techniques for being a good communicator.
Yeah.
And I think what's important is that for the audience to pick one of the things that we talked about. In the discussion, start with a good question. Learning to listen. Don't do all the talking. Learn not to interrupt. This is something I actually didn't mention before, but learning not to interrupt. On the health side, they did studies with doctors and patients, and they found out that doctors would wait 10 seconds before they interrupt their patients. Okay? Mm-hmm. And I think this is true in general conversation. So learn not to interrupt the other person you're talking to. Okay?
That's rude.
Yep. It's not just, but I'm sure you know many people like that. Your friends or other people who are constantly interrupting you.
Yeah.
So learn not to interrupt. Learn to try and understand what this other person you're talking to needs from you. What do you need to achieve? And Yeah, and try all the other techniques we talked about. This chunk and check concept of don't try and give too much information at one time.
Yeah.
And if you do these, just pick one aspect of it. And the next time you're in a conversation, try it. See if it works. And very often you say, wow, that was different. And that works. And then maybe you try another one of the techniques. So give it a try, because these work. We've seen it all over the world, work in every culture I've ever seen. These are universal concepts. Pick just one of the things I talked about this hour. Try it the next time that you're in a conversation. And I think you'll find some real change. Both you'll feel better about it, and the person you're talking to may notice, like, whoa, what was different this time? Or not. But anyway, you'll find out. So try that.
Thank you. And you mentioned that every communication have to have a goal and it have to have change afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. So I believe this episode gives you this positive change after this communication, and I hope you'll find this peace and calmness and comfortable feeling after you having this knowledge and techniques and using it with someone and get that goal achieved and bring the change that you wanted. And that's the goal of our podcast. So thank you very much for coming in here and spreading this beautiful knowledge. And
it's been my pleasure.
And please keep doing it.
Yep.
This great work. And I hope you achieve your goals. And I wish you everything best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And all my audience, see you next episode and wish you joy.
За та биднийг хэрхэн дэмжихээ мэдэхгүй байгаа бол энэ хандивын данс руу мөнгө илгээхэд хангалттай. Гэхдээ их мөнгө биш. Та заавал аимшигтэй их мөнгө илгээх шаардлагагүй. Магадгүй 1000 төгрөг, 2000 төгрөг, 20000 төгрөг байсан ч болно. Гол нь бид та бүхний энэ үйлдэлээс маш их урам авдаг учраас цааш та хүргэж байгаа подкастынхаа чанарыг магадгүй олон улсын эрдэмтдтэй гадаадд очиж ярилцлага хийх гих зэрэг зүйлс бид нар зарцуулахыг хичээж байгаа. Тэгэхээр олон жил бид нар хийсэн энэ подкаста зогсоомооргүй байна, үргэлжлүүлмээр байна. Мөн амьдралын чанарыг дээшлүүлэхэд бид нар оролцоотой байхыг хүсэж байгаа юм шүү. Баярлалаа. Данс доор байгаа шүү. Баяртай.